Chapter 376. It had to be said that Luo Nan's mood was quite high right now. Most of his thoughts last night were on the heart-searing blade, the legendary secret technique of pouring milk. He only skimmed a few glances at the C-rank technique, the dripping sword. He did not sink his heart into it. He only knew that this technique mainly condensed water vapor out of thin air to attack the enemy's weak points. It was a bit like the magicians in fantasy novels, but the sound and light effects were inferior. Right now Luo Nan wanted to go deep into contact with this technique. He first looked at the original recording on Annex 2 of Headquarters RT-8313 mission. Speaking up to this point, he actually wanted to look at Annex 3 yesterday, but he did not have the authority to read it. He could only look at the summary and the like. Only ability users at the architect rank or above could see the full picture. How infuriating. Luo Nan grinned as he waited for the network to buffer. The demonstration recording on the Annex used the reality level of video and audio storage specifications. Its volume was enormous. Even with the special network form of the Xianxia, a period of time was needed for smooth playback. The volume specification corresponded with its value. After all, this was a teaching demonstration for all ability users in the world, and it was done by Her Majesty Empress Wu herself. According to the suggestion of the Xianxia's AI assistant, Luo Nan chose the reality mode with the best results. This was the function of the simulator on the 4th level of the psychic wave network. Right now, Luo Nan had already solved the problem of interference power. He could use the related functions without any pressure. He closed his eyes. After the darkness naturally descended, gentle light slowly seeped in. The light gradually deepened and changed. In the end, it formed a scene of interweaving gray and dark red. There were also intersecting noises, wind pressure, the choking smell of the earth, and even the dry sensation of his skin entering at the same time. He was instantly brought to the vast and spacious wilderness. Luo Nan was already used to such simulation guidance. He just felt that the simulator of the psychic wave network was a bit more exquisite than the burner version of Frost River reality. Right now he was at the entry level of the 9 orifices and 6 roots technique. The stimulation of these nerve cells caused his internal organs, fascia, skin, and flesh to react instinctively. He needed to give himself another hint to make up for the disparity in perception between his mind and fleshly body. Luo Nan raised his head to look into the distance. Right now he was at the top of a hill. This was the highest point relative to the surrounding environment. The dark red earth beneath their feet was cracked layer by layer, extending endlessly towards the horizon. This was without a doubt the wilderness. In the next second, Luo Nan's attention was involuntarily drawn by the bright, sharp and valiant slender figure in front of him. He suddenly realized who was the main character in this world. Her Majesty Martial Empress. For the time being, only the silhouette of Her Majesty Empress Wu could be seen. She was wearing a tailored hunting suit that was tight at the waist. It was dark red in color and paired with brown boots, which highlighted her long legs and matched her slender figure. What was more eye-catching was the lightweight electromagnetic rifle slung across her shoulder. The body of the rifle was cut off by a simple and low-profile ponytail, but it still reminded everyone that this was a dangerous wasteland. This outfit was similar to the color of the wasteland and could also serve as camouflage. It looked more professional, but it also had a wonderful sense of fashion, forming a very wonderful balance. Well, any man would find similar reasons when facing a stunning beauty. To Her Majesty Empress Wu, that rifle was no different from a bag in a fashionable woman's hand. They were both plastic arts. Luo Nan's imagination ran wild as he tried to move about in reality. The enormous video and audio storage format of reality should have left enough space for interaction. But Her Majesty Empress Wu's image did not respond. Could it be that there were no relevant interaction resources stored? Just as Luo Nan's thoughts spun, Her Majesty Empress Wu suddenly turned around. Her gorgeous, bright and beautiful face appeared without reservation. It was within Luo Nan's breathing range. Luo Nan actually took a step back. Of course Luo Nan recognized Her Majesty Empress Wu. Though he had never formally met her, Bamboo Pole's notes on the most important people of the world course had photos, videos and other video materials. Especially for a stunning beauty like Her Majesty Empress Wu. All kinds of materials were even more complete. Luo Nan's impression of Her Majesty Empress Wu was, of course, extremely beautiful. She especially loved to smile. In all kinds of video materials, Her Majesty Empress Wu always revealed a reserved, unrestrained, cordial, mocking, or fierce smile. Her smile infused the already bright and gorgeous image with an even more vivid color. Luo Nan only believed that bamboo pole had specially chosen materials during the class. Only later did he find out that Her Majesty Empress Wu had left behind all the video materials ever since she became famous. Whether it was photos or videos, she had never left behind any expressionless moments. Luo Nan felt that it was interesting at first, but it made his hair stand on end when he thought about it. These were bamboo pole's original words. At the time, bamboo pole spoke as a footnote to Her Majesty Empress Wu's temperamental personality. It left an incomparably deep impression on Luo Nan. Her Majesty Empress Wu in the reality recording was obviously smiling. It was the kind of professional smile that made her seem like a competent host. Oh no, she was more like a tour guide. In fact, this was a reality experience of travel and adventure. With the support of reality technology, those bold characters could completely greet Her Majesty Empress Wu before them. They could shake hands. They could even say a few flowery words. There shouldn't be any problems. However, Luo Nan shrunk back. He shrunk back in great embarrassment. The beautiful face that was so close at hand gave him a tremendous pressure. Was it an incurable outbreak of otaku cancer? Luo Nan was willing to believe that it was bamboo pole's explanation that day that left a shadow in his heart. It was needless to say that Her Majesty Empress Wu was famous for her beauty in her early years. Her appearance could be said to be ostentatiously beautiful. Her facial features were completely flawless, but there was always something out of line between her brows and eyes. Bamboo pole, who had seen countless beauties, had this to say: this so-called out of line was actually a kind of oppressive force. People could feel an unquestionable dominant force from Her Majesty Empress Wu's smile from time to time. She was charming and you would be infatuated. She was gentle and you would be satisfied. She was fierce and you would tremble. She was callous and you would be fearful. Any high-level intelligent life form had a relatively clear self-awareness. Their thinking instinctively revolved around themselves. No one wanted to become someone else's prey. But Her Majesty Empress Wu's out-of-line beauty, supported by her boldness, transformed into a sharp weapon that pointed at the weakest part of the human heart. Perhaps Luo Nan was scaring himself. Right now Luo Nan had a trembling feeling of facing a sharp blade. He only relaxed a bit when he pulled some distance away. Such a reaction hurt Luo Nan's self-esteem. What the hell? If I'm like this when I see a virtual image, won't I immediately kneel when I see the real person? He slapped his cheeks. A wave of rebellious psychology, a common trait at his age, stirred restlessly. He really wanted to use his interactive function to do something, to retaliate. Chapter 377. Our target has arrived. Her Majesty Empress Wu's side profile had slightly parted bangs and a low, fluffy ponytail style. She embellished a full sense of elegance, but the impact was reduced a bit. Compared to her breathtaking appearance, Her Majesty Empress Wu's voice was a bit calmer. It was a bit deeper and she spoke a bit slower. Her enunciation was especially clear, and her tone fluctuated vividly. Combined with her smile, it made one wonder if there was some hidden meaning behind her words. Luo Nan felt even more nervous. He heaved a sigh of relief and turned his head to look at the foot of the hill. An ugly hairless monster had just appeared. Its shoulder height was definitely more than 2 meters, its body was fat and it had long fangs. It was shaking its layers of thick skin and flesh as it silently rushed up. It was less than 50 meters away from them. The scene suddenly tensed up. Her Majesty Empress Wu explained unhurriedly, "This is a pleated wild boar. It's a low-level mutant commonly seen in the wilderness. It has practically no research value, but its skin is thick and its blood is long. Its impact force is extraordinary as well. When it's in a group, it's quite irritating." Her Majesty Empress Wu removed the portable electromagnetic rifle from her shoulder as she spoke. She didn't even take aim. She opened fire with one hand, confident and at ease. The metal bullet accurately struck the head of the pleated wild boar, the thinnest part of its skin. It embedded itself deeply, but soon the flesh squirmed and the bullet fell off. Blood flowed like a fountain, smearing its face. The pleated wild boar was a bit dizzy, but it shook its head. It still charged forward courageously, fully verifying the evaluation of its skin being thick and blood being long. Her Majesty Empress Wu's figure didn't move. She continued with a smile. Pure physical impact isn't that effective. The firearms of the military require a certain degree of concentrated fire in order to be effective. However, as ability users we can do this. The pleated wild boar's angry eye socket burst with blood just as her voice fell. This enormous mutant let out an extremely disproportionate shriek from its throat. Its body staggered and it nearly slipped. Luonan looked at its left eye socket. A bloody hole had exploded there. It was badly mangled and one eye was already blind. Luonan was baffled. What just happened? He didn't see Her Majesty Empress Wu make any unnecessary movements. The wild boar, which had lost one eye, became extremely manic. Even if there was a problem with the correct location, the speed of the galloping was even faster. It was at this time that an excellent video clip appeared next to Luonan in the form of an AR. It replayed the moment just now in slow motion, helping a rookie like Luonan to reconstruct the process. Her Majesty Empress Wu gave a synchronized explanation. The virtual screen clearly showed that when the pleated skin wild boar charged, translucent water droplets condensed in midair and pierced through the pupils, causing the fragile eyeballs to explode. But that was all. Her Majesty Empress Wu also said, "I just unleashed a dripping sword, but the effect wasn't too good. The reason why I'm doing this is to show everyone one thing. In practical applications, you shouldn't overestimate its lethality. After all, this is only an awakened level technique. If you don't use it properly, it will make the situation worse." It sounded very reasonable, but was it really not because of a mistake? Luonan had yet to walk out from the shadow of losing face. He couldn't help harboring a subtle thought and made malicious guesses. But in the next second, the other eyeball of the pleated wild boar, which was still 20 meters away, exploded. The situation seemed to be similar to last time. The pleated wild boar roared once more, but its roar was cut off halfway. Its thick and sturdy body lost its balance. It simply fell to the ground and slid forward. It lost all kinetic energy when it was around 5 meters away from Her Majesty Empress Wu. All that was left was the instinctive twitching of its limbs. Luonan gaped. This time he really didn't understand where the problem lay. At this time Her Majesty Empress Wu took 2 steps forward. She was like a field researcher. She knelt on one knee next to the pleated wild boar, allowing the dry red earth to stick to her hunting clothes. Then her slender fingers swiped through the air, and the head of the pleated wild boar that was as hard as iron was cut apart. It was only this inhuman action that made people remember her identity as an extraordinary. Oh, she wasn't one 3 years ago. Luonan didn't know how many times he had been stumped by this train of thought. The dissection scene was very bloody, but it helped to restore the truth. It was as if Luonan was at the scene. He took 2 steps forward and saw that the brain of the pleated wild boar had completely turned into a paste. Forget a wild boar, even a giant elephant would be cleanly wiped out by this kind of damage. But why was the effect so different between the 2 times? Could it be that she was cheating? Luonan sank into malicious conjectures, finding it hard to extricate himself. On the other side, Her Majesty Empress Wu had already given the answer. In terms of destructive power, this is the effect of the water droplet impact, which is enhanced by both sharpening and exploding. And in order to control it to penetrate the eye and enter the brain, there is also the enhancement of guidance. Her Majesty Empress Wu smiled as she explained the key points of this attack technique. As mentioned before, the dripping sword was called a sword, but it was actually an attack technique that interfered with the material plane of the mind. The principle was to use soul strength to form a special circuit, to fully do work, to absorb the water molecules in the atmosphere, to achieve a series of blessings such as sharpening, exploding, amplification, acceleration, guidance, and so on. It was a technique that killed the enemy in an instant. The core circuit structure of the dripping sword technique was known as the condensation ring. Only through this structure could water molecules be rapidly gathered. And on this basis, various effects such as sharpening, amplification, exploding, and so on could be realized. For this reason, soul strength needed to be close to the material plane. It was sculpted and shaped. It didn't matter if it was rough, and it didn't matter if it couldn't be maintained for a long time. The key point was the suddenness and explosive power of the instantaneous shape. It's not easy to absorb water from thin air and it will delay the battle. Therefore, the most ideal way to use it is through the enemy's eyes, mouth, and other places that are more moist. It is possible to compress the gathering time as much as possible, using food to feed the enemy, to achieve an instantaneous effect. Her Majesty Empress Wu's attitude was candid. She didn't hide the shortcomings of this technique when it was used in actual combat. I'll repeat once more. Pure beads of water have no lethality. It must possess the 5 blessings of sharpening, amplification, acceleration, explosion, and guidance. Only then will it be meaningful. And these 6 structures are all independent. Aside from the condensation ring being the core step, the other effects will need to be increased or decreased according to specific circumstances. For this reason, one must maintain a high degree of calmness and clear-headedness in actual combat when using this technique. Unfortunately, quite a few people aren't able to do this. It has nothing to do with talent. It's just a matter of character. Wasn't character also a part of talent? Luonan really wanted to use the root receptacle, root nature, and root trigger division technique he just learned to fight against Her Majesty Empress Wu. Unfortunately, this was meaningless. Her Majesty Empress Wu explained the 6 structural circuits one by one, including the condensation ring. She combined this with the magnified model on the virtual screen and a live demonstration. She explained the profound in simple terms and was very clear and easy to understand. The clarity of the reality level combined with the powerful playback function of the hexaear created an astonishing effect. Aside from theory, Her Majesty Empress Wu condensed the structural circuits in a casual manner. Even if she deliberately made them visible for the sake of demonstration, the fluctuations and changes of soul strength could still be sensed by others. This was not easy at all. No wonder the volume of the video file was enormous. How many resources would be consumed to reproduce such details? And there was certainly the specialized technology of the inner world inside. Her Majesty Empress Wu, who was in the reality realm, took the opportunity to sell her personal goods. The current application techniques of the mental side are the art of structure. Ability users fully utilize the plasticity of soul strength to form functional structures with interference power. Then they can influence and control more effective material components to realize the extraordinary effect of the mind distorting reality. Luonan nodded over and over as he listened. He thought of the wraith sign. The human-faced arachnid's offensive methods were often realized through complex and special structures. It was just that this fellow had no material foundation at all. It could only create shadows on the mental plane. There was also the configuration that Jack spoke of. It was the operational structure of energy and information. It manifested itself extremely clearly on the body of a burner. Her Majesty Empress Wu even mentioned the high-end application standards of the dripping sword on the topic of the art of structure. According to her, it was not difficult to make the water droplet explode. What was difficult was to condense it into a pellet, to be as sharp as a blade, to strike a vital point without injuring oneself. However, the sculpting and shaping of the condensation ring needed to be extremely precise in order to realize this point. The structure was stable and it consumed too much mental energy. It was not economical enough, so there was no need to criticize her for seeking perfection. The consumption was too great. It was not economical enough? Luonan was very sensitive to consumption right now. His ears immediately perked up. Could it be that this small water droplet, which appeared and exploded in an instant, could consume a large amount of soul strength? His interest rose by several levels in an instant. Unfortunately, Her Majesty Empress Wu did not demonstrate this so-called high-end technique. This caused Luonan's malicious conjecture to erupt once more. Could it be that you couldn't do it back then? The video ended, but Luonan was still unsatisfied. He had yet to look at the lecture notes that Papercut sent over. Just by starting with Her Majesty Empress Wu's explanation, Luonan already had his own understanding. Control, precision, and improvisation were the core of the dripping sword technique, but the most basic thing was still precision. The basic requirement was to sculpt the relevant structure on the millimeter scale. A rough mold would be ineffective. Precision was the best. Luonan was a precision-oriented, mentally enhanced user. His mental senses were first-rate acuity, and he had a basic understanding of configurations. He had an enormous advantage in this aspect. Papercut was right. This technique seemed to have been specially prepared for him. Well, that's right. He could also be considered an artist. Structural art, in a certain sense, could also be considered a plastic art. Luo Nan temporarily tossed his desire for the heart incineration blade beyond the highest heavens. He couldn't help but want to put this C-rank technique into practice. Plus he was ambitious. He wanted to come from a higher place. He disdained that kind of short-term, unstable structure. If he was going to use it, he would use the most sophisticated kind. Luo Nan immediately followed Her Majesty Empress Wu's suggestion. He turned on the air humidifier in the room, increasing the moisture content in the air. He followed Papercut's explanation step by step, attempting to sculpt the structure with his soul strength. On one hand, Luo Nan was ambitious. On the other hand, he had a cautious temperament. He didn't want to eat a fatty in one bite. He wanted to completely grasp the relatively complex overall structure of the dripping sword. Instead, he temporarily ignored the 5 types of amplification structures. He stared at the condensation ring with all his attention. This structural circuit was the beginning and foundation of the mental interfering with the material plane. If he didn't thoroughly understand it, he wouldn't be able to talk about the rest. From the magnified microscopic model, the structure of the condensation ring was more like a smooth donut. The center was empty and the overall rules weren't complicated. But many people would simply kneel if they wanted to accurately depict the 3-dimensional curved structure of the inner and outer rings with soul strength. This was the difficulty that Her Majesty Empress Wu emphasized. However, Luo Nan only failed twice in the gradually damp bedroom air. He was able to make the relevant structure appear in the void. The diameter of this condensation ring was only 0.02 millimeters. Just this one move was enough to crush the vast majority of awakened. Of course, the sculpting effort was a bit more in the beginning. According to the timer of the hexayear and the time it took for the water molecules to gather and take shape, it was already close to 10 seconds. As for the structure of the condensation ring itself, it was hard to avoid roughness. The time it took for the water droplet to take shape after forming was pitifully low compared to the time it took to gather. It was only 0.4 seconds. It was completely meaningless in combat. But what was that phrase again? Practice makes perfect. Compared to the energy and information operating structure of the human-faced arachnid, doing this kind of work, aside from being smaller in size, was the same as drawing a more complex circle. If one didn't care about the precision and details, then it really wasn't a big deal. Luo Nan was a bit dissatisfied with this. Who said that the consumption was great? But this was indeed convenient for large amounts of practice. Once one was done, there was no need to worry about it anymore. It could gather water molecules on its own and then break apart. Luo Nan only cared about the next one and continued to make adjustments. He did it every 3 to 5 seconds. He did it 20 times in a minute. Soon he became familiar with the structure of the condensation ring. He could compress the majority of the condensation ring's shape to 2 to 3 seconds. He did it 30 times in a minute. 30 repetitions in a minute, and most of them were substandard products. It was hard to be effective. Was it boring? Was it frustrating? Perhaps some people felt that it was boring and frustrating, but Luo Nan didn't think so. Everything depended on the details. When he learned to sketch and sketch, he relied on large amounts of practice to slowly grind them out. When he sketched the outline, it seemed as if he was drawing lines that were all the same. It was repetitive and tedious, but in reality his hand could clearly sense whether it was stiff or soft, rough or exquisite. A person's aesthetic sense could be accurately grasped, and the corresponding sense of accomplishment would inevitably follow. Yes, only when one's thinking was exquisite could one touch upon a more subtle level. One could capture a little change, a little progress, and the sense of accomplishment. It was as Her Majesty Empress Wu had said. The dripping sword technique was a kind of structural art. A slight transformation was a kind of plastic art. Luo Nan's perception and aesthetic sense could be judged. Therefore, Luo Nan could borrow his previous successful experience to know what sort of standard he needed to reach. He was mentally prepared for the dry and tedious practice in the early stages. The distance wasn't too far. His progress could be seen. Why not complete it in a spurt of energy? Luo Nan really did treat it as a painting. He followed the routine from back in the day. After a short period of brainless practice, he no longer casually used his thoughts to shape. Instead, he used his brain. He compared it with Her Majesty Empress Wu's example, carefully imitating and correcting it. He first slowed down. After gaining some understanding, he began to speed up. Then he slowed down again. Then he sped up again. In the end, he sped up all the way. Luo Nan forgot how many times he practiced. In the beginning he recorded it through the hexier, but how could he care about it later on? Around 2 hours passed and it was almost time for lunch. Luo Nan's mind suddenly lit up. The brush and carving knife of his soul strength were extraordinarily smooth and quick. He practically couldn't feel the process of carving. A strand of thought was like a seal. It firmly pressed down, and the condensation ring was engraved on the boundary between the mental and material planes. Chapter 378. Luo Nan was stupefied for a moment. In this short amount of time, a bead of water the size of a pinky finger had appeared out of nothing. It was born out of thin air and quietly floated before his eyes. With a slight movement, it refracted the sunlight that seeped in through the window. It was a riot of colors. It was extremely beautiful. A feeling of satisfaction rushed to the top of his mind. Luo Nan grinned and his mind relaxed. Only then did he feel tired. Tired? Oh, that's right. He might still have a lot of soul power left, but the energy and attention that came with it were related to the physical foundation of the nervous system. It was impossible for him to expend it endlessly. He fell back, arms outstretched, on the bed. A few drops of water fell on his cheeks, forehead, and some on his arms and collar. It was so refreshing that he moaned in comfort. Ah? Luo Nan suddenly opened his eyes. He could only watch helplessly as a layer of mist floated down, instantly drenching his body and all the objects around him. Holy shit! Luo Nan jumped up, but it was already too late. The spray of mist had ended and the quilt on the bed was damp. It was wet and damp and it felt terrible. The covers of the 2 notebooks on the bed were also full of water droplets. Fortunately, they were made of leather so they could be easily wiped. As for the quilt, he really had to move it to the balcony to dry. What was going on? The humidifier is also causing an economic crisis? Luo Nan wiped away the water stains on his face. His first reaction was to turn off the humidifier, but it looked like the humidifier was operating normally. He could only release his mental senses to observe the air humidity and the changes on the mental plane. In this way he discovered some clues. Currently, the aftermath of the interference between the mental and material planes was extraordinarily intense. The sources were different and the number was extremely great. However, the amplitude of the fluctuations was relatively similar. It had a clear effect on the water vapor in the air. This gave Luo Nan a rough guess. Perhaps it was due to the latter half of his practice that the sculpting of the condensation ring's structure had become more reliable. Its ability to sustain itself had greatly improved. After accumulating a certain amount of water, it would naturally take on the form of a water droplet. Because Luo Nan was completely engrossed in pondering the structure of the condensation ring, he was engrossed in training with a single heart. His impression of the ring remained at the very beginning. Just like that, the water droplets lasted longer and longer, and the speed at which they disintegrated became slower and slower. In the end, there were at least a few hundred water droplets floating in the room. When he was distracted and lost control of his mind, the structure of the water droplets became chaotic and exploded, turning into a thick mist. That was about it. Luo Nan shook his head and sighed. He roughly tidied himself up, lifted his blanket and went to the balcony. Just as he took 2 steps forward, a glint of water flashed in the corner of his eyes. It was a water droplet that had just formed. Oh, this of time of time. Luo Nan hugged the blanket and stared at the beads of water. He was sure that all the water droplets had exploded and it was definitely true. Perhaps it was because Luo Nan's feeling was on point, but the final structure of the condensation ring that Luo Nan sculpted was the most perfect in terms of shape. Its precision reached a certain standard. After a period of turbulence, the water that had gathered completely dispersed, but the basic structure of the condensation ring did not explode like other rings of the same kind. Instead, it tenaciously preserved itself. Luo Nan's attention was temporarily focused on this bead of water. Not much of the consumption. Strands. Endless. Perhaps for other mentally enhanced users, long periods of time would be a bit of pressure. But Luo Nan's soul strength was affected by the high output of the format pyramid production line. Every second of progress was several times that of this kind of consumption. It didn't hurt nor itch. If this was called consumption, then the whole world was in an economic crisis. Luo Nan grinned. Since it involved the relevant situation, he instinctively used introspection to look at the state of his god gear. Just as he cut into the past, his thoughts suddenly froze on the spot. Dropped? It was completely different from what he imagined. The water level of the vast ocean of icebergs, which was already overflowing, had actually dropped by a chunk for some unknown reason. It was even lower than yesterday's normal state. With such an astonishing drop, it was no wonder that he felt a sense of exhaustion. Luonan was a bit stupefied. This didn't make sense. The consumption of the condensation ring needed to be multiplied by 1,000 to 10,000 times in order to achieve this sort of effect. Luonan subconsciously hugged the quilt to his chest. The slight moisture on it reminded him of something. The room had just been sprinkled with water mist. He thought about it. A single condensation ring obviously didn't consume much. But if several hundred condensation rings existed at the same time, then several thousand would be produced in succession, and the process would continue without end. This consumption could no longer be ignored. It was common knowledge that multiple missions consumed a lot of resources. It was possible for this kind of consumption to exceed the output of the format pyramid production line for a period of time. In other words, Luonan's large amount of practice had turned into actual milk pouring as several hundred water droplets exploded. He poured the excess soul strength into the river. No, there was still a scene of milk pouring. But what was this? Atomization? Evaporation? Sublimation? Luonan laughed bitterly at first, but then he laughed heartily. He even tossed the damp quilt up in celebration. Even though the input and output were completely disproportionate, and the effect couldn't be said to be a permanent cure, it was still a pleasant surprise to be able to resolve a threat. Luonan never imagined that the matter would be resolved so easily when his symptoms relapsed. Moreover, he even obtained a rather effective emergency measure. The pressure was immediately swept clean. This feeling of being able to advance and retreat freely was too refreshing. Luonan's mood became very good. He cast his gaze toward the water droplet, and it was as if he was looking at a pearl. There should be a certain upper limit to the water vapor that the condensation ring could gather. The growth of the water droplet's volume had already stagnated. In the end, it was only the size of half a pinky finger with a diameter of approximately 1 centimeter. It wasn't exactly eye-catching, but it was quite eye-catching when refracting light. Luonan thought for a moment. He wasn't going to disperse the water droplet for now. He wanted to see how long it could last and how its overall consumption was. He would certainly have to try out the 5 auxiliary structures in a bit. He just happened to use the core condensation ring as a base. Luonan hastily hung the quilt on the balcony and went downstairs to eat. The water droplet spun around his body. It was quite spiritual. The water droplet did not have the support of the heart ape technique. Instead, it was tightly linked with his soul strength. It was like an extension of his limbs. As time passed, the power of habit displayed more and more astonishing effects. When one was used to something, one would unconsciously ignore it. Luonan temporarily forgot about the water droplet beside him. He fought with the AI butler's anti-human nutritious meal. There was nothing else on this table, but the function of filling one's stomach was complete. Luonan didn't stay idle as he ate in large mouthfuls. He originally wanted to flip through the handouts and notes that Papercut had sent over, but after some thought he continued to flip through the mission posting page. There was nothing else on Her Majesty Empress Wu's posting interface. However, the discussion area below the traditional message page had 20 messages that filled a page. Right now, there were a terrifying number of over 18,000 pages. There were only a few awakened in the entire world. Luonan remembered Zhang Yingying saying that there were less than 70,000 registered awakened in the entire world. This meant that every awakened had posted at least 5 times in the discussion area. Even though this was the accumulation of 3 years, there were certainly quite a few quarreling and spiteful messages within. But from the perspective of the inner world, this was truly a national event. The influence of the world subjugation event could be seen at a glance. The messages in the reply area were arranged in reverse order by default. The newest message was at the very top. It was from 10 minutes ago and the content was a daily meal. Luonan traced back an hour. There were 2 more messages, indicating that the popularity of the discussion did not decrease. They were still in the godly post. Luonan wanted to understand the atmosphere at the time, so he switched the replies to the proper order. He started from the beginning and skimmed through 3 to 5 pages. Most of the messages were, "Is this real or fake? What a beauty. She's my type." Beware of soul fingerprint collection traps. First-time measurement data, and other hipster messages. Of course, there were also, the current Wuxia, she must be a hype, and other idiotic messages that were brutally whipped into corpses. It was very clear that Her Majesty Empress Wu of 3 years ago was not a particularly outstanding character in the world. She did not possess global fame. But it was precisely after this incident that she truly soared to the heavens. She added more and more legendary colors to the world subjugation event. Luo Nan more or less admired her. Even though he felt that the martial empress secret technique was not as marvelous as it was described in practice, the influence was real. And Her Majesty Empress Wu was capable of shouldering this responsibility. Luo Nan skimmed through a few pages wanting to change his method. Just thinking about the 360,000 pages was enough to make him collapse. If he really were to read page by page, he would not be able to do anything for the next 10 days to half a month. He used the Xianxia's intelligent filtering function to eliminate the boring messages. He only looked at the essential replies. Just like this, there were still over 200 pages left. Many of them were tests of the dripping sword. Some were single columns of data. Some were experimental demonstrations. There were also extremely cruel combat scenes. These were the responses of several tens of thousands of ability users from all over the world toward this technique. However, these dry goods weren't the most popular of the essential posts. It was the era of national entertainment. There were always some funny and amusing messages that grabbed the most eyeballs. Luo Nan saw a string of hilarious scenes of practicing and using the dripping sword. There were all sorts of absurd incidents and all sorts of amusing suicides. The high difficulty of using the dripping sword fueled the vitality of these videos. Luo Nan saw a certain eccentric person use his own mouth to quickly condense water droplets. The result was a tragic explosion. Luo Nan could not refrain from giggling foolishly on the dining table. He watched a string of videos and nearly missed his afternoon class. When he returned to his bedroom to do his afternoon class, he shot a glance at the balcony. He saw the slightly swaying quilt over there. His mind suddenly stirred and he walked straight over. Today's weather was cloudy. Sunlight came and went. The effect of drying the quilt was quite average. The color of the quilt was light and there weren't any decorative designs on it. There were faint halos left on it, just enough to form half a fuzzy human silhouette. Luo Nan used the Xianxia's visual camera function to take a picture of the quilt. Of course, he also allowed the water droplets floating in midair to enter the frame. He created the title, "A Morning of Practice in Exchange for Rain." He then posted it to the comments section. This was sharing, right? Luo Nan himself was unclear about the subtle thoughts of a youth. But his mind was still clear. He used anonymous mode. He only showed the location of his registration, which was the Xia City branch. Of course, he also showed the time of his registration. One look and Luo Nan could tell that he was a noob. This newest message soon appeared at the very top of the page. Luo Nan refreshed it twice, but there was no response for the time being. He was happy and went to do his afternoon class. It was already past 1 o'clock in the afternoon by the time he combed through the vital energy of the liver, heart, and spleen. Luo Nan was used to single-mindedly concentrating on cultivation. His mind was filled with similar elements. He had nearly forgotten about small matters like uploading photos. He shifted his attention to the water droplet that still existed. Through his mental senses, he knew that the condensation ring at its core was still stable. Perhaps as long as the supply of his soul strength didn't stop, this thing could continue to exist. The condensation ring was undoubtedly a very good carrier. Luo Nan attempted to use it to further grasp the 5 auxiliary structures of sharpening, amplification, acceleration, and so on. He was just about to replay the reality recording to learn the relevant knowledge when he suddenly recalled an essential reply he had seen during lunch. The starting point of the respondent was that he was dissatisfied with his firing speed in combat. He suspected that Her Majesty Empress Wu was cheating. The respondent started from the beginning of the video, analyzing the authenticity of the reality recording frame by frame. Though he had serious doubts about the authenticity of the recording, the angle was more practical. He used various analysis techniques. He even captured and analyzed the soul strength fluctuations produced by Her Majesty Empress Wu in combat twice. The data was extremely detailed. This would be an excellent starting point if he wanted to replay it. This reply was very long. It was enough to start a series of posts. In fact, this was a link to a hot forum post. The number of replies it drew in was quite large. These replies were distributed in various hot spots in the thread. If the reader was interested, they could see a long string of replies with a light touch of telepathy. Of course, they could also choose to use bullet screen mode, but that was too messy. Luonan didn't like it. Anyone who read the thread would inevitably be affected by the hot spots. Luonan paid more attention to the ones with a large number of replies. He originally wanted to lock onto the latter half of the lecture, but he stopped midway. He saw a hot spot with over 10,000 replies. What attracted his attention was a scene that left a deep impression on him. It was the moment when Her Majesty Empress Wu suddenly turned her back to the viewer not long after the video started. The poster complained, "I actually took a step back when I saw a beauty. This isn't logical. That's why I became suspicious." The replies instantly went off the mark. I'm relieved to see the poster take a step back. I really regret it at the time. Step back +1. Regret +1. Step back +1. Regret +10086. Am I the only one to throw myself at her? Raise your hand if you throw yourself at her. Does throwing yourself at her count? You don't even give me a second glance, do you? The poster has already analyzed it below. Everyone is retreating here. The video has a fixed program buried in it. It's to keep you bunch of perverts at a distance. So it was like this. Luonan came to a sudden realization when he saw this. So he wasn't the only one who suffered and lost face. This was the common experience of all the participants. The irresistible elements within made up for the young man's wounded heart. But then Luonan was confused. The pressure that pierced the weak points of his heart and the fear he felt were also the effects of the program. Chapter 379. Emotional memories were often particularly deep, but they were often distorted. From Luonan's impression, he had taken a step back. It was a true reaction of his mind. But the analysis of this quintessential post was reasonable and convincing. This created a contradiction. Should I believe the data or should I believe my feelings? Luonan believed the former for now, but he still harbored some doubts. He continued to read, hoping to find a more decisive and convincing reason. The group of braggers was exposed when they replied to this point. They had a tendency to turn back to the main topic with great difficulty, but not long after the following comments veered off the mark. The reason was that an ID called Unchangeable Gold had sent an emoticon of someone pinching their fingers fiercely. He added 3 simple words. I was wondering. This Unchangeable Gold was certainly a public figure. After his reply appeared, a long string of comments directly quoted the contents of his speech. It had become the center of the topic. Boss Gold has been exposed. Queen Wu, be careful of the hooligan. So that's how it is. Gold has always been like this. Boss Gold represent headquarters in an expedition to Xia City. Most of these comments were from 3 years ago. They called out Her Majesty Empress Wu's nickname from back in the day. The atmosphere was extremely enthusiastic. But this was not the most explosive point. A dozen or so messages later, a certain ID replied with the same quote from Unchangeable Gold. The content was even simpler. It was just a string of ellipses. But it was this simple symbol that caused a group of bored people to clamor as they pounced over. They replied one after another in remembrance. It was no wonder that they were not calm. The person who came later was the true source of all evil, the instigator of all evil. Booming. No one knew what happened back then. The current ID of Her Majesty Empress Wu was dyed with the most distinguished purple-gold color of the society. She was the symbol of a veteran, a powerful person, and a person with real authority in the society. After she personally replied, the comments below truly exploded. One could vaguely feel the fiery atmosphere of the time from the dense overlapping of the messages. But strangely enough, there were still people who came to pay homage to this temporary hot spot. Luonan scrolled to the end and saw that the latter half of the replies were mostly, Boss Gold is dead. Burn incense if you have something to do. Ambition is not far. The soul has returned. I don't believe that Boss Gold has disappeared. Sit and wait. Missing? The range of public figures who had been missing for 3 years was very small. Luonan subconsciously opened up Unchangeable Gold's personal page. The entire page was gray in color, but the information of his rank, position, achievements, and honor were all preserved. Looking at it this way, it was easy to understand. Back then, Director Jean was most likely a purple gold certified person, which meant that he was the branch president, the headquarters deputy secretary, and a senior elder. Among this group of people, the strength of B class was considered low. The real ones were B+ or even a class, which was the level of extraordinaries. However, he had been missing for many years, so he must have missed the qualification certification process that was held once every 10 years. The relevant benefits were temporarily frozen, and the display of his ID had also become ordinary. Only this locked page and the old posts from back then had some traces left. Luonan really did seem to have heard of this before. It was most likely in Bamboo Pole's Notes on the Most Important People of the World course. It shouldn't have been listed separately, but Luonan recalled that there had been an extremely famous case of extraordinaries going missing in recent years. The Maple Pavilion case. Luonan flipped through the information given to him by Bamboo Pole. His memories from the class became clear. This Mr. Unexchangeable Gold was indeed a legendary character. Rumor had it that he was one of the first capital tycoons to strike it rich after the war. He had a net worth of hundreds of millions, but he had awakened to extraordinary powers by chance. He had been infatuated with them ever since, so much so that he had spent all of his wealth in order to take a step forward in cultivation. Perhaps the heavens had been moved by his determination to spend money, or perhaps the extraordinary powers he had awakened to were truly astonishing. He had advanced to become an extraordinaire in the 80s, becoming one of the most apex existences on the planet. After that, he resumed his old business and entered the sea of business. He opened a chain of hotels called the Maple Pavilion. He had brains and the status of an extraordinaire. He had opened hotels all over the world in a short few years, rushing to enter the top 100. His net worth was even greater than when he had first made his fortune. By now, no matter how one looked at it, this Mr. Unexchangeable Gold was a true winner in life. His experiences were wonderful and perfect. However, normal people couldn't understand the world of great experts. It was unknown what Unexchangeable Gold was thinking. He felt that it wasn't enough to open the Maple Pavilion hotels in the 88 metropolitan areas of the world. He began to operate hotels in the wilderness to do business with vagrants. In the beginning, he really did succeed in a few operations. He gained quite a bit of reputation among the vagrants. However, 3 years ago he rushed to the wilderness to inspect a new location for his hotel. He suddenly encountered an accident and went missing. According to the results of the investigation at the time, the location where Unexchangeable Gold went missing was a mountainous area of nearly 2,000 square kilometers. The force of the impact pierced through the Earth's crust, detonating dormant volcanoes and changing the terrain. The power of an extraordinaire was terrifying, but it was useless. Those who should have gone missing had gone missing. Bamboo Pole mentioned Unexchangeable Gold during class. He wanted Luonan to understand that even an extraordinaire wasn't an omnipotent god. Coincidentally, the specific time of Unexchangeable Gold's disappearance and the time of his reply were 24 hours apart. These were the last traces of him in public before he left the metropolitan area and entered the wilderness. In a certain sense, these words could be considered his last words. Luonan finally understood the reason for the abnormal number of replies to a boring topic. In the end, it was because of this. There was clearly a closing song of a tortuous legend hidden within. Sigh. Luonan was no exception. He sighed and closed the analysis thread with dull interest. He didn't want to look at it for the time being. If a young man with the highest goal in life was to become an extraordinaire, he would be depressed for an entire day and night upon encountering such a thing. Luckily, Luonan's goal was a bit distant from this field. He adjusted himself a bit and stopped looking at the thread. There were other things he could refer to. Luonan hadn't looked at the handouts and notes that Papercut had sent him. He planned to spend half the afternoon to understand them. He never expected to discover that this handout actually revolved around the recording of reality after flipping it open. It was tightly integrated. There was nothing to say. Luonan could only activate reality and link to reading mode at the same time. He began to work hard. Of course, the handout only brushed over the first few interludes. It mainly started from the moment he discovered the pleated wild boar and entered combat mode. Sure enough, it was just as Papercut said. Her Majesty Empress Wu's personal explanation of the handout was much more detailed. It was also much more profound than the elite replies seen online. In the morning, Luonan used a mere 2 hours to train the condensation ring to a certain level. Because of this, he had some doubts about the technical difficulty and actual combat power of the entire dripping sword. But when Luonan saw the handouts personally produced by Her Majesty Empress Wu, he had to reflect on his own shallow understanding. Not only did Her Majesty Empress Wu give a thorough analysis of the condensation ring and the 5 auxiliary structures, she also mentioned many of the thoughts she had when making the video. She also added many application techniques, touching upon all kinds of combat environments, unexpected situations, variations of techniques, and so on. From what Luonan could sense, Her Majesty Empress Wu used the condensation ring as a foundation. She could add or subtract auxiliary structures at will. She could even add or subtract the condensation ring itself. Her Majesty Empress Wu revolved around the 2 vitals of the enemy, the eyes and the mouth. She could transform into a dozen major categories and hundreds and thousands of killing techniques. Luonan didn't quite understand the other categories, but there was a part that involved the nervous system. Just a few words were enough to make his forehead sweat. A small water droplet, through various ways of stimulating the nerves, could achieve 7 or 8 effects such as death, hallucination, paralysis, torture, and so on. Every move was highly maneuverable, as long as one's control ability was up to standard. Such endless transformations, it was simply inconceivable. It was a pity. It was a pity that Papercut had no talent in this area and wasn't very interested. The notes he recorded were a bit superficial. It wasn't very satisfying to look at them. Luonan hated himself for feeling guilty last night. He just wanted to dodge He Yuan's warning. Not only did he not get the heart-searing blade video archive, he even skipped over the dripping sword. He read the handouts and notes from beginning to end, but he was not satisfied and wanted to read them again. He didn't expect to find another video at the end of the notes. It wasn't long, only 2 or 3 minutes. It was President Ouyang's concluding speech. Papercut had recorded it on the spur of the moment. At that time, there were more than 100 people sitting in the circular conference room. They were the backbone of the branch. Luonan looked around and found a few familiar faces. In the center of the conference room stood Ouyang Qin and Her Majesty the Martial Empress. Slightly to the side, Old Man Yu sat in a wheelchair occupying a corner. The 3 heavyweights of Xia City appeared in unison. The standard of this intermediate training class was already top-notch. This made Luonan look forward to next year's spring training class even more. Generally speaking, the host's speech, the concluding speech, and the like should be relatively empty. They were heavy on flattery and had no substantive content. At first glance, Ouyang Chen's path was also like this. However, his evaluation method and focus were quite to Luonan's liking. This was what President Ouyang had said: 50 years have been spent on contemporary research on supernatural powers, from nothing to the current classification. In this period of time, the number of applied techniques alone has exceeded 70,000. Mud and sand have fallen and fish and dragons are mixed together. I recognize the vast majority of these techniques, but I don't believe that they have any practical value that can be passed down for a long time. These applied techniques are either simple and crude. Some are tedious and complex. Some are profound and abstruse. There are few exceptions. In the future we will probably only see them in museums. Through them we can feel this era of barbaric growth. But a year ago I saw the dripping sword released by Lady Wu. Its usage requirements aren't high and its consumption isn't great. The vast majority of awakened on the mental side can use it. However, it isn't a simple matter to use it well, to use it fully, and to use it to a high standard. After today's lesson, I am even more convinced that this simple technique can completely squeeze out the potential of an awakened. It can exhaust the imagination of an architect. Even if one reaches the level of an extraordinary, one can still unearth valuable topics from this technique. The conference room in the video was in a bit of an uproar. Clearly, the participants were somewhat unable to accept President Ouyang's high evaluation. Ouyang Qin then gave his explanation. It looks like the dripping sword doesn't touch upon anything essential. But by relying on the 6 simple structures of the mental interfering with the material plane, it has realized far too many changes. It is like the basic material elements can form the entire world. We should also take note of the condensation ring at its most core position. It has an inconceivable possibility. On the microscopic plane, It achieves the highly efficient collection of water molecules through an extremely concise structure. It can completely replace the microscopic ability of extraordinaries. Why is it like this? I have yet to come to a conclusion, but this technique of going from simple to complex, from complex to simple, and switching between simple and complex at will is extremely mature, complete, and high level. So much so that I believe that this is the result of 100 years in advance. As far as the present stage is concerned, there is no way to increase or decrease it. There is nothing to nitpick about. As a user I can know how it is, but I don't know why it is. But as a researcher, I must bow and pay my respects to this genius and exquisite design. Then President Ouyang really did turn around. He bowed his back toward the faintly smiling Her Majesty Empress Wu. The video ended here. Truly kick-ass. Luo Nan gave this crude praise to both Her Majesty Empress Wu and to President Ouyang. Using an imprecise expression, a water molecule had a diameter of approximately 0.4 nanometers. Even though Luo Nan's soul strength had advanced by leaps and bounds, his precision was barely able to touch the micron level. There was still quite a bit of distance from the nanometer scale. Under normal circumstances, Luo Nan did not know how long it would take for him to effectively collect water molecules by relying solely on his soul strength. But now, a tiny basic structure had accomplished this. Luo Nan was unable to figure out the mysteries within with his current level of knowledge, no matter how hard he tried. The puzzlement was hard to resolve, but it was also full of admiration. So much so that Luo Nan had a thought. It seemed that bowing to this legendary lady was not unacceptable. Another afternoon passed after Luo Nan finished reading the handouts and notes. The condensation ring gathered a small bead of water by Luo Nan's side. It was the size of a fingertip. This was already the limit of its volume. According to Her Majesty Empress Wu, Luo Nan's usage belonged to the thankless type. However, even that legendary lady would never imagine that Luo Nan possessed a production line that produced an unending stream of soul strength. When the in and out were completely disproportionate, there was no need to measure anymore. It was fine as long as he was willful. With a slight stir of his thoughts, the bead of water he controlled was like a sword pill from a novel. It leaped and flew, coming and going freely in the room, doing as he pleased. The materialization of supernatural abilities gave him a greater sense of achievement compared to the soundless siege hammer. There was only half a day left in his closed-door cultivation. His plans could not keep up with the changes. Luo Nan's cultivation plan was far from reaching his expectations in order to clean up his mess. The dripping sword had become the most unexpected harvest. It should be firmly grasped. What? The star atlas of the format pyramid? Wouldn't that be a huge problem? In any case, Luo Nan had already developed a deep interest in the dripping sword. He even had feelings for it. Chapter 380. Luo Nan decided to press on with a spurt of energy. He grasped the 5 auxiliary structures of the dripping sword. In his opinion, this was possible. The 5 structures of amplification, acceleration, sharpening, explosion, and guidance were all built around the condensation ring. The complexity of the structure was low, and the requirements for precision were also very limited. Especially the range increase, acceleration, and guidance. These 3 structures that increased the effects of control were just extensions of the condensation ring. Luo Nan only needed an hour to master them very well. Of course, this was partly due to the sturdiness of the condensation ring, which allowed him to practice on it again and again. He did not have to worry that the crude auxiliary structure would explode and cause him to start all over again. Luo Nan was already able to make the fingertip-sized bead of water dance up and down within the room. If he urged it with all his strength, it would be like a streak of water slicing through the air. It would only be able to see the light but not the shadow. Then it would slap onto the wall. It was truly a tragic car accident. The 3 auxiliary structures had exploded on the spot, and the water accumulated in the condensation ring had all been left on the wall, flowing down the wall. Only the structure of the condensation ring had withstood the test. Luo Nan also knew that the room wasn't suitable for training, so he cast his gaze towards the sun-covered courtyard. The condensation ring, which was still accumulating water, was driven by Luo Nan to smash into the screen window. The screen window was breathable, but this condensation ring was already at the micron level. The fine mesh had no effect on it. After exiting the window in just 2 seconds, the auxiliary structure and water were all replenished. Luo Nan had a good feeling as he watched the water vapor gather and scatter around the condensation ring. Controlling the bead of water to fly here and there felt even better. Without the restraints of the ceiling and walls, the water droplets initially flew randomly in the yard, but then they spread out in circles. Finally, they passed through the roofs and branches of the community until they flew more than 2 kilometers away. People came and went in the community on the weekend, but no one noticed the water droplets passing over their heads. Even if they did, they would only catch a glimpse of the light at most. They could not understand the truth behind it. The water droplets that were controlled by soul power could naturally reach the location covered by soul power. However, Luo Nan also comprehended Her Majesty Empress Wu's philosophy as he operated. As the distance between him and the water drop sword grew longer, he needed to expend more soul energy to maintain his connection. It also required many auxiliary structures to adjust. While making use of them, they also had to pay attention to the problem of running in. After all, it was the interference of the mind with the material plane. If there was no order between the two, it would cause unnecessary consumption and interference. As for how to ensure the most effective cooperation, there was only one way: practice. Without going through hundreds or thousands of mistakes, it would be impossible to understand the subtle and complicated relationships hidden within. Needless to say, training full of mistakes also consumed a lot of energy. According to the general knowledge Luo Nan grasped during this period of time, even if the basic structure of the condensation ring wasn't damaged, Luo Nan just needed to adjust the other 3 auxiliary structures. It would take roughly half an hour to reach the limits of a mentally enhanced awakened. However, Luo Nan didn't need to consider the issue of consumption at all. He only felt that the feeling of hitting wherever you pointed within a range of more than 10 square kilometers was super cool. He even thought that if he extrapolated from this logic, wouldn't it mean that as long as his soul left his body, wouldn't he be able to run around the streets with the dripping sword? Moreover, with his soul body sensing range, if he was in the Nade district, he would be able to cover the entire Nade district. If he was in the Riverwu district, he would be able to surround the entire Riverwu district. How was this dripping sword compared to the flying sword in the ancient legends to behead people? Thoughts spun in and out of his mind, but in the end he just shook his head in self-mockery. The lethality of the dripping sword was extremely limited, and it was difficult to control and transform it. There was a most basic bottleneck that determined his train of thought to be nothing more than wishful thinking. The out-of-body state was similar to what ancient metaphysics called the Yin spirit leaving one's body. There was no material medium. Though one could travel 1,000 miles in one night, one could not do anything to the material world. There was no interference power to speak of. In this way, as long as his soul left his body, the condensation ring would naturally. Luo Nan's mind was suddenly stupefied. After the blank period passed, his previous train of thought was completely washed clean. The following thoughts were like grasslands after a spring or summer rainstorm. They grew endlessly. What would happen? What would happen to the condensation ring after his soul left his body? That's right. Soul strength needed to have a material medium in order to be used in the material world. If he first left his body and then made the condensation ring, his interference power would not reach a certain level. He would never be able to carve it into shape. But now he had already made the condensation ring in advance. He had embedded this precise structure into the boundary between the mental and material planes. Though its nature was rather subtle, it was already in actual existence from the perspective of the material plane. It was tantamount to him having made a machine. This machine could automatically gather raw materials, water molecules, and carry out production. All that was left for him to do was to fill it with fuel, soul strength. In this way, when his soul left his body, the condensation ring would be the medium. It would be the medium. It would be the medium. It would be the carrier. It would be possible to realize interference. Wasn't that right? Luo Nan lay down on his bed, cutting off all his thoughts. It was better to directly test things out than to think about it. Even if he failed, he would only lose a fine-level condensation ring. At this stage, he would just lose a piece of blue equipment. As he mentally prepared himself, he decisively went into an out-of-body state. In the next second, he pulled his soul out of his body and floated out the window. He floated side by side with the 1 centimeter diameter water bead under the warm afternoon sun. There was quite a bit of time between now and noon, but the slanted rays of sunlight and the dense yang energy in the air still transformed into formless astral winds. They blew endlessly against his soul body, and the consumption of soul strength suddenly rose by a large amount. There were very few B-rank powers who could go into an out-of-body state. Very few of them would brazenly go astray in the day and compete with nature in the first 2 or 3 years after they reached this realm. Student Luo Nan relied on the format pyramid production line to produce soul strength in an unending stream. He had abundant stamina and was able to do this willful method. Luo Nan still didn't consider the problem of consumption. Right now he only paid attention to the condensation ring. The water bead had yet to collapse on the purely material plane, and there was no obvious wear and tear. As for the condensation ring at its core, it was extremely stable. It steadily consumed soul strength. Everything was calm and tranquil. It was natural. This feeling was like being engraved in a lens. It was preserved in a negative, the moment of a swift paddling through the water. Though the watermark was shallow, it was nearly permanently engraved. The infusion of Luo Nan's soul strength gave this simple remnant image a new layer of color. Through a different form it obtained a life force. Perhaps there was a problem with the analogy he chose. Right now, Luo Nan's heart was filled with a swift, causing a nearly delusional realization to appear in him. It involved the mutual interference between the mental and material worlds. Luo Nan felt that when the interference occurred earlier, the user seemed to have warped time and space to an extremely small extent. The user had intercepted an extremely minute fragment from the endless river of time that Luo Nan had experienced. Then the user had used soul strength to endow it with new meaning. Damn it. This topic was too deep. If Luo Nan thought a bit deeper, his brain capacity would explode. Plus, his train of thought had clearly gone astray, so he decisively gave up. In any case, the facts before his eyes verified Luo Nan's initial thoughts. There was no problem at all with continuing to control the condensation ring after his soul left his body. The two naturally intersected. There was a continuation of a timeline and a cause and effect relationship. Who created who? Who attached to who? It formed a very interesting circle. Luo Nan had a faint conjecture. Perhaps other mentally enhanced ability users wanted to use their soul bodies to interfere with the material world. They should have done so through similar methods. That was to first create a stable tool that could be attached to. Could be a condensation ring, a hot air balloon, or a glider. As long as there was a small object that could intervene between the mental and material planes, then it would be like what was said in philosophy classes. Humans create and use tools. They are different from all other animals. Then they change the world. Of course, not just any condensation ring could achieve this function. The condensation ring Luo Nan created was a piece of blue equipment. Yes, it was possible that it was a piece of purple equipment. This condensation ring had certainly crossed a certain threshold in terms of precision. It had met some strict standards. Only then was it able to maintain stability for a long period of time in the boundary zone between the mental and material planes. Only in this way could it become a tool, a machine, and not a mere delusion. Luo Nan's soul soared into the air. His soul strength continued to act on the condensation ring, forming an unquestionable interference force. The water bead's bearing capacity was quite weak. Luo Nan tried to add a bit of force and the bead collapsed into mist. However, the condensation ring's structure remained stable, and it continued to gather water. Luo Nan certainly needed to make adjustments if he wanted to go a step further. Luo Nan pondered over the technique within, but his brain was a bit too excited right now. His train of thought was erratic and hard to control. He had just had some inspiration for micromanipulation when a string of seemingly splendid thoughts suddenly burst forth in his mind. Yet he could not find the reason for them, stirring them into a pot of porridge. All right, this was just a reminder. He should not forget himself from excitement. Perhaps he had overlooked something. He could think deeper. Were there any relevant factors that he had not considered? Luo Nan pondered for a while to no avail, so he changed his perspective. What problems had he not resolved over the past 2 days? The economic crisis in the format pyramid, the remodeling of the star atlas, the root receptacle, the root nature, the outsourcing of Her Majesty Empress Wu's business, the paranoia of his aunt and uncle, the setback in the exploration of the mysteries of gear. Luo Nan only discovered that there were so many unresolved problems on his body after a rough combing through. This was still a time of peace. If the threats from headquarters, the Order, and Quantum Corporation were added in, Would he still want to live? Luo Nan reflexively wanted to rub his own head. He wanted to see what sort of person was capable of stirring up all these threats together. However, it was his soul body that moved. The body lying on the bed in the room was motionless. This was the inconvenience of a mental journey. The spiritual light was like a blade, instantly severing all of his chaotic thoughts. It was also like an electric shock. The powerful light tore through his mind, illuminating the hazy world for a time. Stimulated by the spiritual light, an object that existed within his brain but was not part of his flesh and blood appeared. It trembled endlessly as his soul's strength entered and exited it. The external neuron. Luo Nan finally thought of it. He had pondered over how to interfere with the source of the material plane after his soul left his body. Wasn't it because of the external neuron? That night, his soul left his body to explore the mysteries of gear, but it was difficult to enter. He speculated that it was very likely because he did not bring the external neuron with him. Later he tried to absorb it purely with his soul strength, but he failed miserably. Then he created the reversal of true energy, using the material to interfere with the mental. He burned and refined it, but there were no results. But now the condensation ring had fallen from the sky and brought him around a corner. It had actually easily and skillfully crossed the great gate of his soul, interfering with the material world. With the support of the condensation ring, his out-of-body soul was able to possess interference power without going through his fleshly body. Couldn't this method be used with the external neuron? Right. The thought was unstoppable once it formed. Luo Nan was unable to continue thinking. His soul body immediately threw itself back into the room, restoring the faintly discernible connection with his fleshly body. Then he willed it, stimulating the external neuron to produce a response. There were no surprises. The electric dragon that remained within his brain radiated a brilliant radiance. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws as it swam outwards. Electricity seeped out from between Luo Nan's eyebrows in the next moment. Luo Nan instantly severed the direct connection between his soul and fleshly body. The external neuron had just thrown itself outside his body when it lost its guidance. Naturally, it was about to retract back. Luo Nan's soul strength drove the condensation ring to meet it. On the mental plane, electricity and the condensation ring's structure collided. There's a way. How could there be contact if there was no interference? Luo Nan's joy only lasted for 1/100th of a second before the external neuron's powerful impact crushed through the condensation ring. The accumulated droplets of water simply collapsed into mist, leaving not a single drop behind. The 3 auxiliary structures that supported the condensation ring were instantly wiped out. As for the condensation ring itself, it shook violently. Luo Nan's heart sank. Was the condensation ring's carrying capacity still insufficient? Before Luo Nan could find a basis for his rising and falling emotions, the electricity of the external neuron instantly split apart. It actually followed along the structure of the condensation ring, changing and flowing. It was like a special kind of ink that followed along the traces in the void to re-inject itself. In turn, Luo Nan's soul strength was affected by the pull. It followed the traces left in the void and walked once more. Luo Nan had a clearer understanding of this process. Oh, that's not right. How was this filling? This was simply using the structure of the condensation ring as a mold. Electricity took the lead and the main body of the external neuron came afterwards. Holy crap. Luo Nan could only watch helplessly as the condensation ring he was so proud of exploded by the external neuron. There was no luck to speak of. Even though Luo Nan had repeated the phrase, "blue equipment" 10,000 times in advance, his heart still twitched when things came to a head. It was a good thing that he didn't scream. Just as he hated that he couldn't beat his chest and stamp his feet, a certain stimulus flashed in his mental senses. It was like a red-hot branding iron that pressed down. Luo Nan finally couldn't hold it in. Even though he was in his soul-body state, he still let out a cry. A structure of flowing electricity appeared in the void. It had a diameter of 0.02 millimeters and a thickness of about 1/4. Its shape was smooth and round without edges. It was like a hollow donut, but the volume was completely incomparable. This hollow structure floated in the void, steadily seizing and absorbing Luo Nan's soul strength. At the same time, it absorbed the water molecules in the atmosphere, quickly forming a scale. The first droplet of water was gathered, reflecting the sunlight. It was a riot of colors like a condensed rainbow. This was the external neuron, but at the same time, it was also the condensation ring. A dove taking over a magpie's nest? Or perhaps it was a rebirth. Chapter 381. A 7 to 8 centimeter long metal thread that was shaped like a spider's web and emitted electricity on the mental plane transformed into a hollow donut with a diameter of 0.02 mm and a thickness of 0.5 mm in front of Luo Nan's eyes. Just like that, it weaved and perhaps condensed and shrank, finally forming a microscopic structure on the micron scale, and displaying a wonderful quality between the material and the spiritual plane. Fine. In any case, Luo Nan had never truly grasped the external neuron's volume, weight, and material. Luo Nan was quite cautious about the new condensation ring floating in the air. His soul force touched it carefully, but the other side was incomparably cooperative. With just a thought, he could control it effortlessly. It felt no different from the previous version. At first, Luo Nan was cautious, but later on, everything went smoothly. He was already unable to distinguish the difference between the two versions of the condensation ring. Subconsciously, he controlled the water droplets to fly up and down in the bedroom. The rest of his brain was occupied with thinking. What concept is this? What is the principle behind this? What kind of trick is this? Why the F***ck? His emotions, which had been muddled by the miraculous changes of the external neuron, finally recovered the momentum that he should have after repeatedly thinking about it to no avail. With a surge of emotions, all of his thoughts were overturned. Even though the scene of Luo Nan seizing his body and exchanging his bones was a wondrous creation, and the mysteries within pointed to the essence of the universe, it was unable to overcome the ecstasy that surged within Luo Nan's mind at this very moment. No matter how good the theory was, it couldn't beat reality, right? Luo Nan already understood the practical significance of the changes. From now on, he could carry the external neuron with him to any place that his soul body could reach. Of course, this also included gear. The human mind was just that strange. No matter how strong the desire in the bottom of one's heart was, one could still remain calm when the goal was just out of reach. However, once the goal was confirmed to be within reach, all the previous cultivation would be instantly broken. Before the pleasant surprise brought by the external neuron faded, Luo Nan's mind was occupied by gear. Luo Nan confirmed that gear hid a great secret. It was a great treasure trove for him. As the key that was most likely to unlock the treasure, the external neuron also hid a big secret. Perhaps only when the two came into contact would they appear at the same time. He didn't know if his conjecture was correct, but how would he know if he didn't try? Luo Nan was a bit unable to control his emotions. He was impatient right now. The soul circled around the bedroom 3 times and came up with 3 reasons. First, today is Sunday, the construction team will not work. There are no miscellaneous people waiting there. Secondly, the soul could leave the body and bring along the external neuron. The micrometer scale structure was equivalent to the cross-section of a spider's silk. It was extremely tiny and could come and go quietly without anyone noticing. Thirdly, it was still early. He could make a round trip within 5 minutes. There was plenty of time to explore. If everything went well, he could come back for dinner. If things didn't go well, he could go back again after dinner. All the reasons were in support. All the conditions were in place. What was there to wait for? Before he could finish his thoughts, his soul body charged out of the room, ignoring the window screens and whatnot. When he reached the courtyard, he flashed out of the neighborhood and charged into the sky. Luo Nan clasped the condensation ring formed from the external neuron, and the flying speed of his soul body was not affected in the slightest. Faint traces of water could be seen in the courtyard, but he disappeared without a trace as soon as he entered the sky. At 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the sun seemed to be at the same level as the dense forest of skyscrapers. Only the endless light still floated in the clouds. At this time, it was approaching the peak traffic period. Small and medium-sized aircrafts were also shuttling back and forth in the high-altitude traffic layer. The late autumn sun was slightly warm, and the high-altitude airflow was dense and cold. The two intersected, and the impact of Luo Nan's emotions melted a bit. He suddenly came to a realization. The external neuron had a physical body. Only the heavens knew what the consequences would be if it were to collide with something while flying at high speeds. There was nothing wrong with rushing to excavate the treasure, but he was carrying the external neuron. If he were to lose it in a careless operation, he might as well smash his head into his bed and play soccer. Luo Nan was about to fly out of the Nade district by now. His thoughts stirred and the flying speed of his soul body slowed down a bit. He was a bit further away from the uppermost traffic layer. As for the condensation ring formed from the external neuron, it floated in front of his soul body all this time. The condensed bead of water had lost too much energy from flying at high speeds. It was practically shapeless. Even though it was endlessly replenished, it was still several times smaller than when it was at its peak. An odd thought crossed Luo Nan's mind when he saw this situation. In the next moment he used his soul strength to guide the external neuron into the interior of his soul body. As long as he didn't get into a car accident, the external neuron would be fine. The feeling of his soul body swallowing the external neuron was very subtle. This was because there was a constant transmission of soul strength between them. After the external neuron was absorbed into his body, this transmission relationship was completely assimilated into the interior of his soul body. The process was roughly like this. The soul body would first pour soul strength into the condensation ring that the external neuron had reconstructed. The power of nothingness would naturally possess the nature of interference power. It would gather the water molecules in the void. Under the high-speed flying state, the bead of water would be lost at every moment, but it would be endlessly replenished. The early stages of the accumulation of water molecules existed on the nanometer scale. Luo Nan could do nothing about it, but he could sense the large-scale condensation of water vapor in the later stages. This feeling was like the soul body inhaling and exhaling water vapor, carrying out a peculiar breathing. It naturally formed a connection with the outside world. In the traditional sense, the soul body was only at the level of a yin soul. Of course, it was impossible to realize such a connection. In fact, the source of this phenomenon came from the new version of the condensation ring. The interference power emitted by the condensation ring gathered water, and it acted back on the soul body itself. It permeated into every corner of the soul body. And then, Luo Nan's high-speed flight came to an abrupt stop. He hovered high in the sky, and below him was the stream of light from the aircraft whistling past. It was as if the entire city was operating at high speeds. Only he stood alone in the sky, distancing himself from the world below him. He didn't have the leisure to sigh with emotion. He just happened to find an interesting processing machine for his soul strength. This machine swallowed nothing, and came out something. It absorbed 0, and came out 1. It burned nothingness, and condensed reality. This was the condensation ring. This was the external neuron. As the interference power gradually pervaded, it was as if a set of incorporeal skeletal meridians had been stuffed into the soul body. It was draped with flesh and tendons of the same nature. While this description was a bit too exaggerated, a more realistic way of saying this was that Luo Nan's soul body seemed to be plated with a layer of gradually closing incorporeal yet marvelous membrane under the full effect of the interference power. Figuratively speaking, Luo Nan's soul body seemed to have turned into a cloak. Luo Nan's core consciousness resided in the center, and he made contact with the mental and material worlds at the same time through this cloak. The cloak became the facet of the mental and material worlds, intersecting with both planes. It was thin to the point of nothingness, but it had marvelous effects. Luo Nan's consciousness was wrapped in this cloak, and it had a bit of an independent flavor. It seemed that there was an indescribable layer of separation between the mental and material planes. The feeling was subtle. The current Luo Nan was no longer on any plane. Instead, he existed in the interlayer between the mental and material planes. Wherever his mind went, he would sink in that direction. Of course, he was in a soul-body state right now, so he naturally leaned towards the mental plane. The resistance he faced on this side was minimal, close to 0. Forcefully interfering with the material plane would certainly consume a lot more energy, and there would be a few more links. But no matter how much energy was consumed, it was still a breakthrough in his essence. Luo Nan's consciousness suddenly flashed, and the incorporeal cloak stirred. It heavily smacked the nearby void under the surge of soul strength like a storm. Wind appeared out of nowhere under the sunlight, and it transformed into a fine stream. It spun and traveled several dozen meters away, nearly brushing past the upper edge of the high-altitude traffic layer before finally dissipating. The stream of air went far away, and Luo Nan's state of mind was like a whirlpool, endlessly turbulent. However, his state of mind had swelled to the extreme by the time the stream of air dissipated. Such a crude attack pattern was able to cause considerable turbulence in the material world. What did this mean? It meant that Luo Nan had leaped out of the stage of soul embodiment, the level of a yin god. He could truly interfere with the material world, shifting the interference force from the tiny structure of the condensation ring to the entire world. Such progress was like jumping from the ground to the clouds. But under the catalysis of the external neuron, it was logical and natural. This was because this was a jump from nothing to something. It was a qualitative change from 0 to 1. 1 begets 2, 2 begets 3, and 3 begets all things. It evolved into limitless possibilities. It was impossible to overstate the great significance of the external neuron from this perspective. And to put it bluntly, all of this was brought about by the external neuron. How did it accomplish this? In the end, what kind of product was it? What else could it do? It could serve as the framework for Luo Nan's God gear. It could serve as the materialization of the structure of nothingness. It could serve as the pivot for the transformation of soul strength. And all of this seemed to have only unearthed a small side of the external neuron. It could do much more. For example, gear. The more doubts Luo Nan had in his mind, the more expectations he had for gear. He knew that this sort of mentality wasn't healthy, but he was unable to endure it no matter what. His soul body suddenly entered a state of flight once more, and its speed increased. Right now, his connection with the outside world grew more and more real. His perception of the late autumn setting sun and the high-altitude cold wind grew clearer and clearer. It was to the point where he forgot himself. He roused his power and howled to his heart's content. He didn't deliberately attack the material world, nor did he have the substantial power to stir the void. But the incorporeal attack on the mental plane still rapidly spread in all directions. It was fortunate that Luo Nan hid himself deep enough on the mental plane. He didn't go to a depth where most ability users could probe and create a major event. Even if he did create a major event, Luo Nan couldn't care less. He cut into the Pingjiang district of Acumen College in the blink of an eye. Gear was already in sight within the range of his mental senses with a radius of over 20 kilometers. At this very moment, there was nothing else that could attract Luo Nan's attention other than gear. But there was a difference in the magnitude of the attractive force within the various regions of gear. Luo Nan's mental senses covered the area, and he locked onto the westernmost region of the building on the ground of gear. It was a large atrium 50 meters deep and 20 meters in diameter. With a sudden jump, Luo Nan's soul body cut into gear. He arrived within the atrium and floated in the center. His feelings of urgency and anticipation suddenly transformed upon reaching his destination. Luo Nan began to become nervous. He was just as anxious as he was before. He was just as anxious as he was now. His emotions transformed to the fullest, not missing a single bit. The fluctuations of his mood didn't affect his perception at all. Within the atrium, the entire structure of gear guided and gave birth to a chilling aura. It was just like what he experienced on that night. Wave after wave of energy gathered here. After the orderly flow of energy shifted, this place lost all dominance and became chaotic. The ticking sounds rang out on the mental plane. They seemed to have a clear rhythm, but they didn't have any direction. It was like someone had purposely messed up a password lock, waiting for a successor who knew the secret to come and crack it. Of course, the successor would need to bring a special key. Luo Nan's soul body floated in the air. He suppressed his turbulent emotions and sensed earnestly for a moment. He confirmed that the current situation was no different from that night. He followed the solution from last time and gave himself a boost. He stirred the chaotic aura within the atrium once more. Last time, Luo Nan's boost revealed a classical visualization structure. It was the geometrical figure of a tetrahedron, inscribed sphere and circumscribed sphere. But as the format pyramid transformed into a star atlas, the external symbol this time changed into a rotating nebula. Its appearance was greatly different, but the effect was the same. It gave this space a thrust of order. It began the process of cyclotron acceleration like a particle accelerator. Once this process began, there was no option to slow down or stop it. Luo Nan's soul body floated alone in the atrium. He calmly welcomed the crazy scene of layers of restriction, rotation, and acceleration. He also experienced the myriad curtains that fell on the mental plane. The layers of strange information intersected. He knew long ago that the mental plane in his eyes was different from the vast majority of ability users. The mainstream theory of the structure of the mental plane divided the mental plane into 3 zones, 1 region and 1 domain. It was simple and clear. But from Luo Nan's perspective, the mental plane was a deep multi-layered structure. There were hundreds of layers, thousands of layers, and there was no end. The vast majority of phenomena on the mental plane of the inner world could be calmly explained using general theory. In comparison, Luo Nan's perspective was far too cumbersome and complex. However, Luo Nan had never seen an explanation that was more accurate and appropriate than his multi-layered curtains perspective in describing President Ouyang's logic world. Yes, the logic world. Luo Nan never stopped pondering over the strange phenomena within the atrium over the past 2 days. He already felt that the atrium cyclotron he sensed right now was actually a bit similar to the logic world. At the very least, it was a method of distorting the mental plane. Of course, there were more differences. Chapter 382. From Luo Nan's perspective, President Ouyang's logic world used the complex structure of the mental plane to forcefully pull the distant plane over, forcefully linking it with the surrounding material world. It was like casting a hook to fish. It looked casual, but the purpose and logic were extremely strong. It was just that outsiders had no way of knowing. The atrium cyclotron took the form of the order bestowed by Luo Nan as the core. It stirred forcefully, causing the nearby region to weave and twist, pushing outwards layer by layer. It was like grabbing one end of the bedsheet and twisting it forcefully. This would cause the other end to spin, pushing it closer and further. On the other hand, the logic world already had a blueprint and was constructed layer by layer. As for the atrium cyclotron, it started from the inside out. First it changed itself. Then it probed into the distance. One was building a house. The other was the telescope. It could be seen that the effects of soul strength were different. The structures and algorithms were different. The results were as different as heaven and earth. Luo Nan had always suspected that the huge increase in the range of his mental senses after that night was due to the effects of the telescope structure. Right now, the information gathered by the telescope was gradually enriched. The gray-white light smeared and interweaved on the mental plane, gradually materializing to reveal the marvelous landscape of the clouds high in the sky. But no matter how close the telescope's perspective was, the real situation was still separated by a layer. Last time Luo Nan had fallen here. It was impossible to truly touch the cloud world that he yearned for day and night with just the telescope's structural model. It was something that Luo Nan could only do if he didn't rely on external objects. But today he had the external neuron. The external neuron didn't have any particularly obvious reactions during the early stages of the far gazer realm's formation. It was just that the bizarre cloak that had just taken shape had already revealed a special quality due to the external neuron's influence on the road. The cloak warped and rippled within the rapidly rotating atrium vortex, but it maintained an inconceivable degree of flexibility and independence. It continued to display its ability to interfere with the mental and material planes. Because of this, the myriad curtains that fell on the mental plane were connected to the surrounding material environment through the cloak. It was just a little bit, but it was like the cloak when it took shape. It achieved a breakthrough from zero. This allowed Luo Nan to realize a small portion of the effect similar to the logic world. It formed a warped independent region around his soul body. The problem was that the most powerful aspect of the logic world lay in its logic. That was the decisive factor in its construction. Luo Nan did not possess that sort of logic. After the interference between the mental and material planes was achieved, the corresponding area no longer belonged to the scope of the faraway realm structure. There was no specific order, and it was purely a superfluous thing. It would also increase the burden of the soul body. In just a few short seconds, the cloak had become a little sluggish. The excessive structure directly affected the efficiency of the soul energy conversion. As the situation continued to worsen, the external neuron, which was the center of the conversion, was finally stimulated. The condensation ring constructed by the external neuron showed signs of instability for the first time. Some of the lines were extracted from the condensation ring and reached the center of the structure of the condensation ring, where they performed new structures on the microscopic level. This was a completely spontaneous action of the external neuron. Luo Nan's consciousness did not participate. In fact, the scale of the fabric this time had already been probed down to the micron level. It exceeded the precision of his senses. Were it not for the fact that the external neuron and his consciousness were tightly linked together, Luo Nan would not even have the slightest of senses. Though this was the case, Luo Nan's state of mind was pounding and throbbing. He gradually became high-spirited. He was unable to clearly probe the composition of the external neuron, but the chilling aura and the myriad of changes in the curtains were clear to see. During the rotation-acceleration process, the chaotic, distorted interference between the mental world and the material world began to show regular fragments. The corresponding interference forces no longer conflicted and melted each other. Instead, they piled up and spun, achieving a certain reflection with the structure of the telescope. If the rotation speed of the telescope was said to be 10, then the region that Luo Nan could interfere with and warp had a rotation speed of 1. Every 10 revolutions of the telescope, the interference area would revolve once. It was precise and rhythmic, but it was gradually changing and speeding up. 10, 1, 10, 2, 10, 3. The rotation speed of the telescope was already relatively fixed, but the rotation speed of the interference region was constantly increasing. When it came to the material plane, there were already obvious signs. In the center of the atrium, the light in the void was clearly distorted, and the low sound of bang bang, like the vibration of a bowstring, continued without end. If Luo Nan hadn't lost his temper 2 days ago and destroyed the majority of the surveillance cameras inside gear, this piece of information would have been impossible to hide. How could Luo Nan care about this? His soul body was located in the core region of the distorted void. He could personally experience the extent and speed of the distortion. The cloak was no longer sluggish, but the layers of acceleration accumulated astonishing potential energy. It pushed his emotions endlessly, causing his body and mind to tremble both inside and out. His guess was correct. No matter what form the external neuron took, its existence held an extremely important meaning to gear. It was like a key was inserted into a keyhole. It twisted according to the rules of induction, and the heavy door slowly opened for him. 10-4, 10-5. In other words, when the telescope structure made 2 revolutions with his soul strength, the interference region revolved once as well. The 2 revolutions were perfectly synchronized, and Luo Nan's consciousness went blank for an instant. This was because at this very moment, the stacks of gray clouds he had been paying attention to all this time collapsed without any warning. It was as if the entire sky was pressing down heavily on him. Luo Nan came to a realization in the next second. It wasn't that the firmament was pressing down. It was that he was piercing through the clouds. Heaven and earth had already shifted. Luo Nan crashed into the depths of the nearly boundless grayish-white cloud layer. His perception of the outside world was a bit more realistic thanks to the existence of the cloak. Clouds piled upon each other under the dim lighting. Smoke flew about and a blood-like color seeped through the gaps between the clouds. A direct chill and the ear-piercing howl of the wind came at the same time. This place seemed to be some high-altitude region, probably the upper part of the troposphere. The airflow was intensely disturbed, like a never-ending tsunami of clouds and mist. The airflow swirled the clouds, water droplets, and ice crystals. It swept past with a rumble violent and manic. The astral wind blew through the gaps between the clouds. Luo Nan could see that there was an even vaster space beneath the thick clouds. It was just that it seemed to be covered by a prairie fire. The blood-red color between the gaps between the clouds was the reflected light. That's right. It's here. It's here. Luo Nan looked all around. He saw the cloud world that often appeared in his dreams, and he personally experienced this absurd yet realistic scene. Even though he didn't know where he was and it was hard to distinguish between things, his impatient and unavoidably absent-minded emotions from the past 10 days finally knocked the last nail in his coffin, and it fell to the ground with a bang. He let out another howl under his impassioned excitement. This time the cloak stirred the clouds and ice crystals, and a wave of grayish-white air rumbled out. But soon, it was swept flat by the fierce whistling high-altitude astral wind. It was annihilated within the surging and flowing clouds, leaving no trace behind. The vile environment of this place could be seen at a glance. However, no matter how vile the environment was, Luo Nan, who had entered in his soul body form, received the same effects as nothing. It wasn't like last time when he had entered with his fleshly body in a muddle-headed and relaxed manner. Since he didn't have the ability to fly, he fell madly all the way. It was hard not to be flustered under the darkness of the sky. He held on for a dozen or so seconds, worried that he would fall to the ground and die without a corpse, so he could only move out. He never expected that it would be so difficult to enter again. In any case, it was hard for Luo Nan's imagination to run wild when faced with such a vast world and experience such a marvelous and strange place. In the final phase of Gear's atrium, the telescope became a silo under the magical effect of the external neuron. Luo Nan was directly transported to this cloud layer of unknown origin and unknown position. Only the heavens knew how far this place was from Xia City and Gear. A few hundred kilometers. He had never heard of a similar environment around Xia City. Tens of thousands? All right, this was very fantastical. It was very pretentious with extraordinary power. It was useless to let one's imagination run wild. Though it was difficult for Luo Nan to enter this place this time, he was 1,000 times more relaxed than last time. He decided to observe carefully and gather as much information as possible to provide a basis for his later judgment. Observation and reconnaissance had always been Luo Nan's strong suit. Pure observation combined with the living starry sky gave him an effective observation range of over 20 kilometers. Aside from extraordinaries who were unable to grasp accurately, this was a top-notch observation range in the modern world. And as the saying goes, knowing one's self speaks for itself. After Luo Nan comprehended the principle of the structure of the telescope, the utilization of his soul strength had a clearer goal. He consciously adjusted and optimized it, and there was still considerable potential to be excavated. If this continues, it won't take too long to break through with an observation range of 25 kilometers. But who the hell can tell me which part of the world has a cloud layer that exceeds 50 kilometers in thickness? And it doesn't even have a boundary? Luo Nan was at the peak of a young man's memory. His general knowledge of geography was quite decent. He remembered that the relevant course had taught him that it was impossible for the cloud layer to exceed the height of the troposphere. And the Earth's troposphere was the highest at the equator. It was only 17 or 18 kilometers. The polar regions were only 8 or 9 kilometers. What the hell was 50 kilometers? Yes. He was too timid last time. He couldn't hold on for more than a dozen seconds before fleeing. According to the results of his observations, how could he live up to the cloud layer thickness if he didn't freefall for 5 minutes? His soul body floated within the cloud layer, staring blankly for a while. During this time, the two sides of the cloak interfered, condensing mist for him to form a blurry human silhouette. It was very likely that it would become more lifelike if this continued for a period of time. Luo Nan didn't care about this. He had already begun to feel that something was wrong. Not to mention the thickness of the cloud layer. The blood-red color within the cracked and warped cloud crevices did not fade for a long time. He had previously taken it for granted that this was the influence of a great fire burning on the surface of the earth below, or perhaps a volcanic eruption. He was even prepared to use this to further clarify the specific coordinates. But right now, the range of his mental senses, which he was so proud of, couldn't even go beyond the cloud layer, let alone confirm a volcano. Moreover, was it really a volcano? Luo Nan was deeply doubtful. His observation continued. The living stars were spread out, displaying a simple ecological map within the range of the mist. A few believers continued to display their usefulness in the surroundings of the core star cluster of the self format, but the life forms further away had already switched to another group. It would be quite awkward to say, another group. The cloud region was inconceivably vast, but the density of life forms was truly urgent. Luo Nan could only detect 2 or 3 kittens within the range of his senses of over 20 kilometers. Alright, what did he say just now? Kittens? Luo Nan's thoughts had yet to come to a realization when a thick cloud suddenly exploded a dozen meters in front of him. Smoke scattered in all directions. A dark red shadow flashed into existence out of thin air. It was as swift as lightning, smashing through the cloud layer and pouncing in front of Luo Nan in the blink of an eye. A thick and long arm smashed over, and its sharp claws distorted Luo Nan's perception. Only now did the boiling murderous aura appear with a rumble. Not only on the material plane but on the mental plane as well. It brought forth a terrifying attack akin to an eruption of lava. The change happened right in front of him. There was no room for him to operate his thoughts. Luo Nan could only make the most instinctive reaction. The cloak interfered with the mental plane to the greatest degree. He ignored everything else and his soul body escaped to the deepest depths he could reach on the mental plane. The blurry silhouette formed from the mist exploded and shattered, turning back into water smoke. The attack on the material plane had hit nothing but air. But the most fatal attack was still on the mental plane. He had been thinking of a volcano just now, but now there really was a volcano erupting on the mental plane. It was as if Luo Nan had returned to the time when he first saw the terrifying might of the human-faced arachnid. He looked at the enormous specter that was burning and expanding in the void. The specter faced the sky and roared, extending its claws to strike over. It was truly like an erupting volcano, a pillar of turbid smoke and fire that smashed into the clouds. The mental plane trembled and swayed. The burning demonic claw, brimming with the desire to destroy, chased after the tail of Luo Nan's soul body. It crushed through several hundred layers of the curtain structure of the mental world to form a shadow behind Luo Nan. Luo Nan could already feel the breath of the Grim Reaper. However, the Grim Reaper's scythe was unable to hook onto its target in the end. Luo Nan didn't know just how deep he had dived into the mental plane. He only knew that the burning demonic claw had crushed through nearly 1,000 layers of curtains in succession before finally reaching its limit. No matter how much it ignited with its killing intent, burning through and warping the majority of the mental plane, it was ultimately unable to crash into the level of Luo Nan's soul body. It was just a little bit off, but it was still not enough. And in reality, the powerful attack missed. The dark red shadow completely disregarded the laws of matter. Its figure came to a halt like a steel nail, smashing into the clouds. It seized the position of Luo Nan's cloud aura silhouette and used malevolent eyes to stare fiercely at Luo Nan. What the hell was that? Luo Nan was both shocked and furious. His reaction to stress just now was truly extraordinary. It was all thanks to his soul body. If his fleshly body had come in, wouldn't he have been smashed into a meat patty just now? No, from the speed and strength of the attack just now, he would probably have been blasted into smithereens. He would have died without an intact corpse. It was fortunate that he hadn't encountered such a situation the last time he came in. Otherwise, today's matter wouldn't have happened. Right now, Luo Nan was like entering a wildlife sanctuary. He was sitting in a fully armed tour bus, separated by a layer of transparent glass. He was in close contact with a dangerous, ferocious beast. As for the ferocious beast, it was entrenched in the clouds, revealing its malevolent body. Its height should be between 5 to 7 meters. The reason why there was such a large discrepancy was because its body was crooked like an ape. Its forelimbs hung down, making it hard to judge. Chapter 383. The skin of the beast was dark red, and its bulging muscles were covered with a layer of fine scales. Its bald skull was wrapped in a thick layer of wrinkled skin. The top of its skull was deeply caved in and its eyes bulged out. Its pupils were dark red and its background was dark yellow. Its mouth and nose were almost indistinguishable, forming a circle of dark purple that looked like a paste. Saliva flowed from its mouth, making it ugly and ferocious. Just by looking at its appearance, there was no doubt that it was some kind of mutant species. Looked a little like a gibbon, but it was 100 times uglier. Luo Nan didn't know whether or not this fellow belonged to the type of mutant that had already been discovered. In any case, he had no impression of it at all, so he gave it the name of Mushed-Mouth Ape at the last minute. At this moment, the rotten-mouth ape was staring straight at him with its crimson eyes. It was clear that the enemy was able to lock onto Luo Nan's specific location on the mental plane even though the enemy was unable to attack him. Just this point alone surpassed the vast majority of people Luo Nan had encountered. After about a minute, the mushed-mouth ape seemed to have grown tired of the pointless staring. Its strong body slowly sank and disappeared into the clouds. Its gaze never left Luo Nan's location until the very end. Its gaze was turbid, but it possessed the cruelty and greed of a predator. This made Luo Nan understand that this mushed-mouth ape was treating him as prey. It had no intention of giving up in the short term. As long as it grasped the opportunity to break through the isolation on the mental plane, it would slaughter its way over without the slightest hesitation. It would tear Luonan to pieces, then it would devour and digest him. Sometime later, Luonan's thoughts were verified. Sure enough, the mushed-mouth ape didn't leave. It maintained a high level of patience and intense desire. It constantly wandered around Luonan's surroundings ready to make a move. Sometimes it really did launch an attack. Its tyrannical and overbearing attack pattern was able to exert pressure on Luonan even if its attacks failed. From this point alone, the mushed-mouth ape truly lived up to its name as a top predator. It was trying to turn a failed ambush into a marathon of death that tested its endurance and determination. Controlling his soul in the depths of the mental plane at all times to avoid the attack range of the mushed-mouth ape was indeed quite tiring. He had to use the cloak to interfere at all times, and the consumption of his soul power was considerable. But it needed to be emphasized once more. Luonan wasn't afraid of consumption. He wasn't afraid of consumption. He wasn't afraid of consumption. Important things must be repeated 3 times. It wasn't easy to move around in the depths of the mental plane. The current rate of soul power consumption had indeed surpassed the output of the production line, but only by a little. It was like the evaporation of seawater by the sun. Although the amount was considerable compared to the total amount of seawater, the consumption was negligible in a short period of time. If Luonan wanted to, he could race this mushed-mouth ape for several days and nights. They would see who would tire out first. However, Luonan didn't have any thoughts of torturing himself. He was even more unwilling to waste his precious time on a meaningless chase. After taking the opportunity to observe for half an hour, he sped up with all his might. With the astonishing flying speed of his soul body, he forcefully shook off the mushed-mouth ape's pursuit and regained his peace. Even though Luonan had gotten rid of the threat, he saw that the cloud region that Gear and the external neuron had guided him to had such a vicious being. This greatly exceeded Luonan's expectations. Luonan wasn't purely observing the mutant during the previous half-hour of pursuit. He followed the scouting method he had just learned not too long ago. He circled around a temporarily set center, crossed and flew, and did his best to expand the range of his senses. He was unable to obtain an exact number at the moment, but he made a rough estimate. His soul body continued to expand outwards at high speeds. The cross-sectional area it covered probably exceeded 10,000 square kilometers. It was a vast airspace with a diameter of 100 kilometers. It was equal to the size of the core city area of Xia City. But not only did he not discover the limits of the cloud layer, even the top, bottom and 4 directions became blurry in the end. Only one thing was clear. The mushed-mouth ape he encountered had appeared again and again in this airspace. He no longer had any thoughts of 2 or 3 kittens. Even though there were only a few of these valiant and tyrannical kittens in the 100-kilometer area, it was still too crowded for apex predators. They moved like lightning and their range of activity was frighteningly large. Luonan tried to lock onto 2 of them. He only followed them for a few minutes before the targets jumped out of the limits of his senses. But at the same time new mushed-mouth apes leaped in. Last time, Luonan had only stayed here for a dozen or so seconds due to falling from a high altitude. He had avoided a direct confrontation with them. It was simply first-rate luck. He seemed to have overlooked something. He needed to sort it out. First of all, his encounter in the atrium of Gear and the marvelous use of the external neuron proved that his mother and that person had come here back then. Second of all, regardless of his mother's fate, they had indeed escaped unscathed back then. Luonan made a rough estimate of the mushed-mouth ape's strength. Judging from its attack power alone, it should be above B rank, not yet A rank. And it seemed to live in groups. Could be said to be quite terrifying. There were a limited number of similar locations on Earth, and all of them were places where even extraordinaries had to take a detour. Did his parents already possess this level of strength back then? It was truly impossible to judge from the bits and pieces of information related to his mother and his memories. Luonan could not deny this possibility, but there were other explanations. For example, the cloud world back then wasn't this dangerous. This thought popped up in Luonan's mind because he noticed that only the mushed-mouth ape and the others flew through the cloud layer. They were extremely monotonous. According to his limited knowledge of ecology, this didn't make much sense. Even if they were mutants, they were still a type of living creature. They needed to survive at the very least, and eating was the most basic. The mushed-mouth ape did indeed possess a powerful desire to hunt, but the cloud layer environment was too monotonous. So far, Luonan had only discovered this type of living creature. There were no others. There were no other minerals or plants with high energy densities that could be ingested. The basic conditions for feeding them were not present. In addition, even though they maintained a distance from each other and maintained vigilance, Luonan couldn't see any intense desire to kill each other. Devouring each other and the like was not a normal option. Of course, Luonan considered the mushed-mouth ape to be a mutant, to be a living creature. If this thing was a fantasy breed that ate the wind and drank dew, a legendary demonic god, then Luonan would ignore what Luonan said. Was this the case? The possibility was very, very low. Luonan was temporarily unable to draw a life sketch for the mushed-mouth ape due to the interference of the powerful life magnetic field. However, the berserk and scorching life energy could not be faked, let alone the corporeal desire to hunt. All in all, Luonan concluded that these mushed-mouth apes were very likely affected by special factors. They had temporarily entered this area. For example, hunting prey. The mushed-mouth ape that had just killed Luonan not only possessed brilliant and skilled hunting techniques, but its choice of attack was also very appropriate. It hunted with caution and patience as if it had practiced this frequently. Luonan drew a simple inference from this. They should have a target at least in the near future. They were adept at roaming the mental plane. They very likely possessed the ability to interfere with the material world. They possessed a certain counterattack method. They had even caused a vicious mutant of B-rank strength to suffer a loss. They were mainly active in the cloud layer, but it was very likely that they had gone to other places and provoked a pile of trouble. All right, there must be a target. Luonan's chaotic thoughts finally became clear. But after becoming clear, his first thought was to slap himself in the face. If his guess was correct, he had personally thrown the target in. It was that snake tongue. That's right. He had hurriedly entered and exited the cloud layer through gear that day. Luonan still had Snake Tongue, who had suffered a backlash from the curse, in his hands. He didn't know how he had thrown Snake Tongue away, but he thought about it carefully. Indeed, it was most likely that he had thrown her here. If this was the case, Snake Tongue wouldn't have suffered a backlash from the Nightmare Vine spell while she was in a fugue state. She shouldn't have fallen to her death and been here for 10 days, right? Luonan was a layman when it came to the curse branch. But after that day he did some understanding of Snake Tongue. He knew that this woman was one of the few curse experts of the inner world. Her mental state was extremely formidable. No matter how fierce the backlash from the curse was, it wouldn't be able to trap her for long. If he were to consider this line of thought, then the current situation would have a relatively clear explanation. Of course, this was pure conjecture. Perhaps his mind was obstructed and his train of thought was wrong, leading him in the opposite direction. But in any case, Luonan's current mood was showing signs of worsening. The joy and sense of accomplishment from overcoming countless difficulties and finally entering the cloud world had long since been scattered by the volcanic eruption of the mushed-mouth ape. But before he could sort things out, he thought about the matter with Snake Tongue. He thought about the great secret his mother had hidden for many years. He didn't even have a clue about the bizarre and wonderful cloud world, and he had been tossed about by a wandering soul for 10 days. What if some extremely valuable clue was destroyed by Snake Tongue? Or perhaps she deliberately hid it and spread it. What should he do? The more he thought, the more anxious he became. Luonan made a firm resolution to find Snake Tongue. If she was alive, he wanted to see her. If she was dead, he wanted to see her. Even if he was dead, he wanted to see convincing evidence. Luonan pondered for a moment and chose to follow a mushed-mouth ape. He would observe it for a long time before making a decision. But the stalking didn't go smoothly. Luonan's chosen target wasn't the one that had attacked him before. It was just a random choice. This fellow's body was a bit smaller, but it was just as valiant. Luonan was deep in the mental plane, exceeding the attack range of the mushed-mouth ape, but the ape still sensed him. The long stalking caused the target to react greatly. It turned around to chase and attack many times, but it was never able to touch Luonan's true body. It became extremely manic, constantly going in circles, refusing to cooperate. Luonan was annoyed, but he couldn't help but sigh in admiration at the same time. Such keen senses and the ability to suppress the material and mental planes at the same time were simply perfect methods in the domain that the mushed-mouth ape could reach. From the information obtained by the society, extraordinaries were excluded from the various ability users due to the different nature of their abilities. For example, the format of Fire of the Burner could attack a Darksider species like the human-faced arachnid, but its destructive power was a bit weaker than in the material world. It wasn't like the mushed-mouth ape. Its destructive power was astonishing no matter what plane it was on, and there was no obvious loss in conversion. As for how it was used, how much experience could Luo Nan earn from observing it a few times? Even if Luo Nan wanted to copy it, it would be hard for him to do so. He could only drool at the mushed-mouth ape's methods. Time passed like this second by second. Luo Nan knew that it would be hard to find any clues related to Snake Tongue if this continued. He was just about to change his train of thought when a strange feeling spread over from the other side of the void. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.